So, hello everybody. Thanks for being here. If you want to come a little forward, you'll like the slides a little better, I think. The screen is not huge, but your call. Thank you all for coming. I know it's early on the first day of the conference and we don't have energy, but it is what it is. So let's start. Today we're going to talk about Slack hacking. And I'll walk you through some of the things we see and some of the problems and how you can improve your Slack resiliency. So a few words about myself. I'm almost 30 years in cybersecurity now. Most of my career in AppSec. In the last few years, I've moved to cloud security and incident response. I always say I'm a CloudSec guy at day and incident response at night, because if you've ever done incident response, you know it always comes on a weekend or an evening. And so this is what I've been doing, and this leads to a lot of the talks I'm doing these days, because we see so many things in the wild, in the real world, of attackers abusing things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So my company, Mitiga, that's what we do, cloud and SaaS incident response. It's not a sales pitch. If you want to talk to me after that, that's great. But just for the context of what we do, and through our platform, we just see an immense amount of attacks every week. So let's talk a little bit about Slack. So Slack is a really, really great platform. I love Slack. We use Slack at Mitiga. I think how many people here use Slack? Hands up. Good. How many people use Teams? Okay, almost the same. I feel your pain if you use Teams. No, I'm kidding. It's a great platform too. I think Slack is catching up a little bit better with DevOps developers, and Teams is a little bit more secure, but we'll talk about that later. But whatever you use, Slack or Teams, it is taking over all our internal collaboration, right? So it's replacing email for some organizations. Unfortunately, it's replacing file sharing. I was sitting yesterday in a conversation with somebody and said, oh yeah, I have customers who put all their SOC 2 evidence into a Slack channel. That's where they store everything. That's really, really great. And it's becoming a target, right? And anything that holds interesting information and interesting collaboration is becoming a target. And we're seeing attackers abusing Slack for different things. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to learn about different types of Slack attacks or hacks and risks. We'll discover how attackers can abuse existing functionality in Slack and how the way you use Slack influences what attackers can do. And we'll understand what you can do today to become more resilient, even though it's not always easy from a cultural perspective. So I want to just say a few words on what this talk is about and what it's not about. We're going to talk a lot about Slack culture, because Slack culture is probably the biggest influencer of your Slack resiliency, more than anything else, and we'll get to that. I'll tell you a little bit about real-world Slack attacks, some that were public, some that we've seen. And then we'll talk about what attackers do with Slack. And finally, we'll talk about mitigation, detection, and response, which is what we're all here for. I'm going to tell you what it's not about. It's not about how to hack Slack. It's not about a new 0 day in Slack. And it's not about vulnerabilities in Slack. Why? Because it's not interesting. Yes, once in a while, somebody will find a 0 day. Slack will patch it the next week. Slack has a great security team. And that's not what this is about. Attackers are abusing Slack without vulnerabilities and without 0 days. Also, this talk, I use the word Slack. A lot of what I talk about refers to Teams. Not everything. Teams has a slightly more solid permissions and security foundation, because it's part of the Microsoft 365 package. But from a cultural perspective, it's pretty similar. So, yeah, I know I said I'm not going to talk about it, but just one slide to get it out of the way so you understand how people hack Slack. So one of the things that I learned as I moved from AppSec and pen testing and vulnerabilities to IR is that we are all very busy with trying to secure things, vulnerabilities, patching. And I'm not saying it's not important, don't get me wrong, it is. But the reality is that more than 50 attacks start with just a phishing or some other identity theft. And so the initial access vector is a lot less interesting. When you start doing IR, you discover that what's really interesting is what happened after they got the initial access, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today in Slack. So, there are plenty of ways to get initial access to Slack. Phishing, of course. Not everybody still uses single sign-on for their Slack, so they have separate credentials, maybe not MFA turned on, a lot of bad security posture that allows phishing. Social engineering, tricking people into giving you their credentials. Session hijacking, not as common because, again, that requires some vulnerability, but it could be a vulnerability in one of the apps, and we'll talk about that eventually lets you get there. And there's a market for active sessions for Slack. Now, if you use Slack on the web, you know that it remembers you all the time, right? That's because your session is valid forever, basically. And so if somebody steals your session cookie, they can use that to hijack that. And we've seen some attacks with that. And then if you do have single sign-on, so what we see the most is abusing a hack that was originally on the identity provider and through single sign-on going into Slack. And this is happening all the time. And now I'll do a shameless plug to my talk tomorrow. So I have a talk tomorrow about real-world attacks, SaaS world, and I'll talk more about these types of attacks. We also see, not as common, although I expect this to become more common, attacks through apps. So there's so many malicious apps on the App Store. We'll talk about that. And then finally, yes, sometimes there is a vulnerability. Sometimes it's going to get abused. But again, it doesn't really matter. So I want to start with culture. And I'm going to put this slide on. You don't have to read all of this, lots of detail. I took a screenshot from a post that was put on LinkedIn by a friend of mine who sold his startup to Cisco, and he's now helping entrepreneurs. And he did a post on how to use Slack correctly in your organization. And it's all about which channels to use and which things to do and how to encourage collaboration. And that post was a hit. He had hundreds of thousands of views to this post. It was reshared by so many people. And everybody was, wow, this is amazing advice, and it's great. And all I could see is like, this guy is suggesting to create a bunch of public channels that hold sensitive corporate information in them. And that's normal. And why is that normal? Because that's how Slack encourages its usage. If you start a new channel, the default is public. You cannot change that. You can change the channel to not be public, but you cannot change the default. I cannot say, okay, in Mitiga default is private. I say it to my people, but then once in a week I have to go and look at all the new public channels and turn them into private because people forget to do that. And so people create tons of public channels. And a public channel, just so you're aware, means that anybody that is within your org can do anything in that channel, including reading it, joining it, reading everything of its history. Retention is infinite. You're now a 20-people startup. You write all these sensitive things. 5 years from now, they're still all going to be available on your Slack channel unless you do something about it. And there's a huge gap here between development and security. So every third developer on average that joins Mitiga comes to me to complain about our Slack culture because all our channels are private, except for announcements and stuff. It's like, I can't find stuff. I don't know where to find them because you can't search for private channels. You have to be invited to them. And it's like, in my last company, everything was public. And that's the norm. But that's a norm that is helping hackers. The second thing, it's collaborative, right? So people started using, it's an instant messaging. It replaces, picking up the phone. But people started using it for file sharing. And we just talked about a minute ago, right? Storing your SOC 2 evidence. This is horrible. It's, from permissions, retention, backup, we'll talk about that. There's nothing in this platform that is making it a really, really good file management system, yet people use it. And I see so many organizations where a big chunk of their knowledge management is sitting there. Another thing that's important, it's very instantaneous. Now, this might not strike as important, but when you get an email and it's weird or suspicious, you might think about it. You have some time. It's not real time. But here it feels like you're just talking to your friend on the phone, right? They're texting you something. There's no, oh, hi, Mr. So-and-so, blah, blah, blah. It's just one line, and this really helps attackers. And in the last few years, it's also become very integrated and connected. So Slack integrates to all the rest of your apps. If you've heard the term SaaS mesh, This is where we're going. All the SaaS apps are talking to one another. And some of these apps have a lot of permissions to Slack or give Slack a lot of permissions. And that, again, makes it much easier to use Slack for a lot of interesting and abusive attacks, because once you're in, you get permissions to so many other things. And probably the last and most challenging one, I've been using Slack for, 6-7 years. For the most of these years, Slack was this thing that it's just inside your org, right? But now with Slack Connect, that's about a year and something old, you connect your Slack to other organizations. And I've seen people that have tens or hundreds of Slack Connect connections, which means you're getting that from different organizations, but people's mindset is still not there. So before I go into what attackers do in depth, I want to just tell you a few stories. And I want to start with this because this, for me, encompasses pretty much everything that you can have in a Slack attack. EA hackers posed as employee on Slack. So the story is that somebody bought a session cookie for Slack. And the fact that they could get a session cookie for a Slack means that somebody probably had a pretty bad posture with some of their apps because they got cross-site scripting to allow that. But they got the session cookie and they sold it for $10. Yes, you can buy a Slack account for big companies for $10. And Slack, they use this and sign in. Now again, once you're signed in for Slack, you can stay there for almost forever as long as you're active. It doesn't require you to re-auth. If you're using a sign-on, you can enforce that through that. And they posed as an EA user. They looked through the Slack. They discovered what's going on. They saw there's a channel for IT support. So they go in IT support. And they tell them, look, I got locked out of my account, my main account, not my Slack account. Can you reset my password? Oh, and my MFA. And the admin did it just via Slack, because nobody expects a user on Slack to be compromised. And they got the full user credentials to the main single sign-on, went in through there, got all the source code of EA. Still not sure what they did with it, but very interesting case. If you remember the Uber hack from a few months ago, yeah. Similar story. They actually started with MFA fatigue. So they got some credentials. They tried them over and over again. And they used WhatsApp, which is not Slack, but the same principle. People use it in the same, it's an IM message. They used WhatsApp to reach out to them and say, oh, I'm your IT administrator. You should approve this MFA. It's a process that's running. And so they used it. Then they used it to get into Slack and from there to all the rest of the environment. So, and this, repeat, Twitter hack. If you remember this, how many people remember the Twitter hack? Not a lot. Okay, so 3 years ago, 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Twitter was hacked. 130 high-profile accounts, ones that have millions of followers, were used to promote a cryptocurrency scheme. So it's, again, hacks is all about money, right? So they went in to convince people to invest in this crypto scheme, and they did it by using high-profile accounts. But the initial access was, again, Slack, right? And so this was big. Twitter had to lock out its users. All these 130 big celebrity users were locked out for a period of time until they finished this. And again, they got access through Slack. Again, through that, they did lateral movement. They didn't publish all the details, but they got Twitter credentials on Slack. So this was when the pandemic started. And they posted in one of the Slack, again, I don't know the specific channel, but one of the channels, they posted instructions on how to connect remotely to the Twitter network, because people were just moving home, right? And crisis is always a good situation for people to do mistake. So this guy got Slack credentials, found this public channel that had this, and used this to get access. Finally, this is from one of our recent incidents. Here, the initial attack access wasn't Slack. but they use Slack to learn what the organization is and who are the security people, who's the CISO, who's the security team, what they have for security, and so on. I'll talk about it more tomorrow. But when they finally blocked them from their single sign-on, their Slack session stayed alive because, again, you just use the single sign-on to go there and come back. And so the attackers sent them a ransom note through Slack. Now think of the impact. You're a CISO, you're sitting at your desk, or even worse, because this CISO was on holiday, because of course attacks are always on holidays, and you open your Slack and there's a ransom note from one of your employees, which at this point is clearly compromised. It's much stronger than any other ransom note you'd get. And so, never mind, they asked for a lot of money and the usual stuff. They know their customers, they know their employees, they know a lot of things because they've been in Slack and they downloaded a lot of information from Slack that lets them be accurate. Okay, so let's talk about Slack risks. So what do attackers do in Slack? I think, we looked at some examples, but let's do it a little bit more organized. So the first thing people would do is data harvesting, right? And this is really, really easy. So we talked about it. There's too much data in public channels. The history is infinite. And a new user can access all the old content. So even if I hack your latest employee, I can go in and see everything that happened in the past. You can download all the files. You can go to the links. And you can do automation with Slackbot. So if you're staying there for a while, you can get Slackbot to notify you on different things, keywords, things you want to track inside the org. If it's a big org, it's hard to sift through all that data. And there are tools that let you extract this data in masses with scripts. Again, you have a valid web session. You can do anything. You can even read data from archive channels. So people on Slack don't delete the archive channels because if you delete it, it's gone. We'll talk about it in a minute. But the fact they're archived only has one meaning, really, and that is that you don't see them in your list of channels. But if you look for them, you can search for them, you find all the archived channels. So all the history that either is public or that your user is on that user. The second thing is social engineering, and we talked about it. I simulated this internally. Hey, dude, I need my password reset. Sure, here it is. Click, enter. You'd be amazed how much this happens. Slack is the #1 tool for collaboration for developers, DevOps. This happens all the time. Not only people reset and do things and create passwords and secrets through Slack without being 100% sure that the other person is the right person, this stays forever on Slack. All these keys and all these credentials, it's terrible. Phishing, malicious links, malware. And basically this is like email, right? If I can collaborate with you, if I can send you files and links, I can do anything that I can do in email. The only thing is there's zero awareness. Again, we all go through a million annoying phishing simulation exercises every year. We've been hearing about this for the last 20 years, and still people fall for it. But for the most part, if you would get now an email from your CEO asking you something very weird, you'll hesitate for a second. Wait, is this really my CEO? Look at the email at the top. Is this the real domain? I don't know, this feels odd. But if you get this on Slack, nothing. We had a customer, the CEO account was compromised. He slacked his secretary that he wants to give gift cards to customers, and they got $50,000 of Amazon gift cards with them. Yeah, easy peasy. It's instantaneous and easy to trust. I've not yet seen a phishing simulation or phishing exercise for Slack anywhere. And it supports everything. You can send files, you can send malware, and yes, Slack has some filters on malware, but again, emails do too, and we still get them through. So malware, files, links, everything. And it's broadcasted. So I can do a mass campaign on your org. I send it on random or all. Or I found one of these fun channels that somebody created that has 90% of the company, which includes a lot of people, but not management because they didn't join the fund channel, and nobody even notices that this attack happens there. Now I want to talk about apps. So apps, and this is true for Slack, it's true pretty much for every SaaS these days. Apps are great. Let's start with that. We love apps. I love that my Slack is integrated to my O365, that it's integrated to everything I do. There are about 2,400 apps on the Slack store. A little under 10% of them was written by Slack and by Slack developers and is confirmed by Slack developers. The rest, it's an open marketplace. They have some basic verification process, but I've talked with people at Slack. It's not very strong. And so these apps ask permissions, and you can build an app that asks permissions for anything. So here's an example. Oh, I can read and write from all public channels. Excellent. That means that if this app gets compromised, even without getting a user in your system, all your data is exposed. We set up a call center for Mitiga 3 years ago, and this call center is like, we integrate with Slack. And, great, that sounds great. And I get their app that wants to work, of course, on an approved app, and it says it wants read and write access to all public and private channels. It's like, what? Oh, that's how they built it. So I'm like, no, just send me an email. I'll write a script that puts it on Slack. But probably a lot of people would just approve that. So malicious apps are a huge deal. We see that in everything. We see it in GitHub. We see that in Salesforce. Malicious apps are used so much, whether they're malicious by intent, meaning I created the app as malicious to get access, or just because they're apps built by a third party that is not nearly as secure as Slack and is a way into your platform. And then the other side, so apps let me go from outside to Slack, but lateral movement can also go from Slack outside. So Slack is integrating with these. So these are two examples, right? So this is integration with Git. Slack is requesting update permissions. It wants to be able to write access to all pull requests, okay? Do you want everybody in Slack to be able to write to your Git? I'm not sure, but that's the default permissions. This is Google. This is just calendar, and still you can write and read anything on the calendar. Again, very convenient. I'm not saying not to use it, but you need to be aware of the risks. And we see these, and we see all kinds of things with lots of permissions, so be aware. Finally, ransomware and denial of service. We haven't seen a lot of this, but I expect this to come because ransomware is the best source of money for everything, really, and why not? And this is great. So how many people here have backups for their SaaS platforms? Ooh, 3. That's good. So almost nobody, right? Let alone for Slack. I'm now looking for backup for Slack. There are 2 vendors that do it. For now, we're just doing exports. Slack, we don't back up SaaS platforms because we trust the SaaS vendor to do that for us, right? But the reality, that may be good against disaster recovery, but not against attackers. The reality in Slack is there is no retention. If you delete something, it's gone forever. If you delete a channel, the channel's gone forever. If you delete a file, a message, it's gone forever. If I'm an attacker that got a hold of an account, I can delete all the channels that this user created. I can delete all the messages and files that this user put in, and there's no going back from that. So, great way to attack. And finally, all this is enhanced with cross-organization attacks. So Slack Connect, and you can, again, depending on your org posture, you can allow users to approve Slack Connect connections with new organizations. And with Slack Connect, you can get messages from people from outside of your org with everything. Now, if you look at the left, this is a screenshot from our Slack. You see there's a little triangle and a little circle and a little square. They represent different types of Slack users. So a circle is a user in your organization. A triangle is a guest user. And a square is a user that comes from Slack Connect. How many people here know that or care about that? I asked random people in my company and other companies. Nobody knows what they mean. Some of them just said, oh yeah, I saw there's a different icon. I have no clue what it means, right? So it's supposed to help users be more aware, but nobody knows about it. And these people that are outside of your org can also send you files and links. And this is the default. I took the screenshot from Slack's admin. The default is to allow Slack Connect users to send files. Okay, so now we're afraid, right? I did my first part of the talk good. Let's see what we can do to become better. So I'm going to go back to culture, and I'm going to start there. And this is the hardest part, because we all don't want to be the people that everybody in the org hates, the security people that prevent anything. But some of this requires some cultural shift to be more secure. So the number one thing is to teach people to do private channels. Public channels is for announcements, fun stuff, and public stuff that has, stuff you would feel comfortable sharing outside of the company. Everything else has to be private. You're talking about customers, private. Code, private. Users, private. It's painful, I know, but it's the single thing that will give you more security when you get compromised. You want to tighten control on app integration. So that's the other painful thing. And that means that only admins can approve apps. Apps are like every third party. Think about it. You have a third-party vendor assessment process and posture and questionnaires and pen tests and whatnot. And then here, if you don't block it, by default, every user can approve apps. So these apps, you don't know who wrote them. So you have to put control over that. You also want to put control over guests and Slack Connect connections. And then you may want to consider retention management. Now, this is a big discussion. I have a good friend, he's got a pretty successful startup. He decided a long time ago, he's not even in security, he decided a long time ago he doesn't want Slack to become a knowledge base or a database. And so they have a script that once a month erases all the content that's older than 3 months old. And that educates people that they can't rely on this for storage. And also means that if they get breached now, the scope of the data is limited. It's a big change for organizations that use Slack as a knowledge base, but it's a thing to consider. And on top of everything, educate your users. So we started doing Slack awareness exercises. I did this talk internally to get everybody's aware. It's the first thing to do. So do not assume trust, and probably that's the most important thing to teach your employees. Any account on Slack can be compromised. Any account on anything can be compromised, right? That's life. We get compromised. Always, if it's something with a big security impact, somebody wants a password, somebody wants access, somebody wants some sensitive data, double check that this person is the real person. Use a phone text to ask them or call them or just go across the desk if they're with you in the office. Do not allow sharing secrets. And again, this is not enforceable through technology, but it's a culture of things. No secrets on Slack. No secrets in clear text anywhere. Secrets through Secrets Manager. And be very careful with Slack Connect. And yes, I know Slack Connect is important. We use Slack Connect as well, but limit permissions. From the technical side, security controls. So first of all, if you're not using SSO, make sure you use MFA. This is kind of obvious, but I still see organizations that don't enforce it. And if you have SSO, then by all means use SSO. But also an important thing to notice that most SaaS apps, not just Slack, when you turn on SSO, it's optional SSO. It's for functionality, not for security. Means it will allow users to log in through SSO, but will also allow them to log in with their regular credentials. So you need to make sure that you enforce SSO, so it doesn't allow them to log in regularly. Limit guests, we talk about it. Third-party app approval, you really, really want a process for that. And again, of course, you're going to approve the main apps, your GitHubs and Google Workspace or Office 365 and so on. But you don't always have to approve every fun emoji app that every developer wants to use that was written by who knows who. I'm going to talk about audits in a minute, but I want to talk about backups. So I just mentioned it. So backups in SaaS world is difficult generally, let alone in Slack. The best thing right now you can do with Slack is exports. So Slack has, in the admin interface, you can export your entire Slack workspace into a directory structure, which you can put someplace that you do backup, or it's already backed up if it's in a different platform. Now, you want to be aware that by default, this does not export private channels, only public channels. So if you want to turn on public channels, you have to open a ticket with Slack support and ask for exports to include private channels. This is a privacy concern. You basically attest that you can do this from a privacy perspective. And then you can write a script, and there's open source scripts online that you can find that you can run this every day and put it somewhere, and voila, you have backup for your Slack. Now I want to talk about audit logs, because when we talk about detection and response, the number one thing we need is log, right? And so the good is Slack has really, really great audit logs. They're easy to understand JSON, they are comprehensive for the most part, and they're easy to use. There's an API. The bad is they're not on by default. So if you didn't do anything, you don't have Slack audit logs. And you need to pull them to get them. And the ugly is it's going to cost you. And that's the really sad part. So we see the same with SSO, and we see the same with audit logs. A lot of these SaaS companies will ask for you to go to a higher tier to get these so-called enterprise security features, like MFA. I've seen that too. So audit logs are only available on Slack Enterprise. Very big organizations obviously use Slack Enterprise, but I've seen big organizations with thousands of employees that don't use Slack Enterprise because it's expensive. So Slack Business is something like $12 a month per user. Slack Enterprise could be more than double that easily. And it's expensive. There's also a tier they don't advertise. It's called Enterprise Select versus the Enterprise Grid. It has all the features of Enterprise, but without the multiple workspaces. And that's $20 per month. That's what we're on because we want the audit logs. So I recommend going there, but yes, there's a cost around that. But that gives you these great audit logs. So with logs, you can do a lot of things, right? So you can detect malicious apps. You can detect odd bot activity. You can detect phishing. Again, you need the right rules. We'll talk about this in a minute. But the logs have enough data in them to allow that. Malware delivery, data exfiltration, data destruction, pretty much everything in Slack is logged. And so first order of business, turning it on. Second order of business, streaming it somewhere. Your SIEM, your data lake, whatever you use to detection. So yeah, that's why I told people in the back to sit in front. Just a little small, but I have a better size. So this is an example of Slack log. It's a JSON, essentially. If we look at this example, this is a file download. So there's basically every Slack log entry has a, who, where, and what, which is very good, right? So the action says what's happened. In here, it's file download, very descriptive. Who, so the user, the email, the user ID, the display name, and the workspace ID. Again, if you're on Enterprise Grid, you have multiple workspaces, so you always want to know which workspace. Where, so IP, workspace ID, workspace name, user agent. That always helps detect weird users that suddenly have the wrong user agent. And then what? In this case, it's a file download, so the URL of the file, the ID of the file. Another example, public channel preview. So this is, by the way, this is really cool. So public channel preview it's something in the UI that you go to a public channel, you don't have to join it to read what's in it. You can preview it to see if you want to join it. So you can basically see all the channel without joining it. So this is a really good thing to look at because it's silent, right? If somebody joins a channel in Slack, you see them. But public channel preview you don't see, but you can see that in the logs. So again, preview of a channel, user, context, relevant object. And so this is an example of some other events that have security value to them, right? So app requested, bot added or bot changed, that's always good to look for. Deletion of channel, all these things. Now, there's a link here in the presentation, and you can find it easily on yourself on Google with the API events. Unfortunately, only about half of the events that we see in the logs are actually documented in this page. I don't know why. But when you start looking at the logs, you see a lot of different events that are not there. But it's a good start, and it's pretty easy to see what's in the logs. You just take, 50 days of logs from your Slack, and you look at all the event types, and you do a query that aggregates them and gives you all the event types, and you learn how to use them. So, we're incident responders. So at the end of the day, we're being called when something already happened, and we need to do incident response, which includes forensic investigation, right? So to do that, it's pretty obvious from what I said. You need to have the forensic data, so you need the logs. If you don't stream the logs, if you don't collect your Slack logs, and you have a Slack breach tomorrow, and you call us or any other IR company, we can't do anything because we don't have the visibility, right? So you need to have the forensic log to be ready for an IR. You need to have the expertise. So you need somebody who can understand those logs. Again, they're not so complicated, but you need some familiarity. And you need to have the tool that supports it. A lot of the modern SIEMs and data lakes will do well with Slack. Some of the older SIEMs don't do so well with app or SaaS logs in general, and Slack as well. We've seen that. I don't want to name specifically, but we've seen very challenging interactions. So make sure that you have the infrastructure to support that. And as I said, backups are really your only tool against a ransomware and denial of service. If you don't have backups and somebody erased it, you're done. So, the apply slide that RSA makes us all do. Next week, review your Slack posture. So just start by taking everything I said here into your org and say, where do we stand? What's our culture? How many, look at the public channels you have. How many of them do you have? What do they have? How many people use Slack to sharing files rather than just sending a link to SharePoint or Google Workspace? Permissions. Can you add, as a user who's not admin, can you add an app? Can you invite somebody to Slack Connect? You can do everything on your own. You don't need access even to the admin. Just figure out where you stand. And then logging in backup status, that's obviously through admin. Just map this out and see where you are. And then start with doing the basic things. Limit app integration, limit guests, turn on audit logs, and make sure that those audit logs are streamed somewhere that supports it. And then, then becomes the hard part. Start implementing more restrictive policies, user awareness trainings, build backups. I strongly urge people to do backups in Slack and also in other critical SaaS applications, Salesforce, O365, Google Workspace. That's the next wave of ransomware. And test your detection and response. See that you're able to identify things. See that you're actually able to investigate, because just building and streaming without testing means you don't know if it really works. Thank you. Questions? Yeah, you have to go there for the questions.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry if it's not about Slack, but you kind of said that between Slack and Teams.
Yeah.
There's some stuff that are about the same. What of what you said would also apply to Teams, and like, do we have similar issues, or it's different, or like what would you say?
So all the culture is the same, right? I will say that I think Teams by default does do channels or teams not public. So in Teams, everything you need to invite people to the team. So that's a little bit better in that perspective. And also Teams being part of O365 has logs in all tiers. You don't have to pay extra for logs. You do have to pay extra for other security features, but not for logs. So that is better. And I think the app marketplace for Teams is not as good from a functionality perspective, but it introduces less risk from the other perspective.
Good.
Other questions?
Yeah, the idea of phishing Slack is interesting. You know, we teach our users about phishing emails and how to recognize them and stuff. Anything we can do to teach our users or educate them on phishing Slack messages?
So one, I think, yes, two things. One, just an awareness training, just like we do for emails. Unfortunately, there are not 25 vendors doing this like for emails, but they will come over time. But you can do it yourself, and you can also do a phishing simulation. Again, we don't have the same infrastructure, but just take a simple notion of phishing with a link to an internal page and send it to people in direct messages, in channels, whatever, and get them to click it. I think that will make a lot of noise internally.
Have you worked with Slack at all to mitigate some of the bad defaults or other things? And what is their response?
We have not worked with Slack. We, as a researcher, you know, we do research, we publish a lot of stuff. You can usually just work with these companies when you have a clear vulnerability or, you know, a specific weakness, and even then, a lot of them don't really like to cooperate. The defaults there serve their main business. They want people to adopt Slack quickly, and public channels help adoption. And Slack is very, you know, PLG type. They start small, they grow within the organization. So I don't think we have the influence on Slack. If the large enterprises will start demanding, you know, let me do default private channels, then they'll do it.
Our engineers love Slack and they like creating their own apps for Slack. Do you have any, our engineers
Yes.
like creating their own apps for Slack. Do you have any recommendations for managing that or giving them guidelines?
So it's really about what, you know, the exposure of these apps. If these apps are internal to you anyway, then it's no different than any other risk, yeah? If they integrate with others, then you want to start thinking about anything application security, just like any other app, right? Other questions? If not, thank you very much.